So, fellas, things are getting pretty weird in the online debate space. Destiny's son has started doing interviews and debates on how he is the newtsie the left has been warning you about. The most far-right opinions you've ever heard, to the point where they're illegal in 19 countries. Now, he debated Drew Pavlou, a liberal Zionist content creator who's 26 years old. Destiny's son is...
Nathaniel, like, how old are you? And I know we don't have to dox yourself, but you're in high school, is that correct?
Yeah, ninth grade.
Oh, wow, ninth grade. I thought you were a little older than ninth grade. Wow. So you are a very young man. Okay, yeah. Alex is looking at me very funny. I didn't know that this is like having Matan on. Okay, wow. So how old would that make you? 15 years old, I hope?
Around, like 14. I turned 15 in March.
At an age where he tells you the month he's going to be a year older. Before we start really piling the bodies up, you need to understand the conniving Drew Nathan had to deal with. Here's how this fucking Drew starts the conversation.
So, listen, man, I don't wanna debate bro or attack you harshly. You're a young guy, so I want to just try and talk respectfully.
Oh, fantastic. I'm glad he's not going to start screaming at a 14-year-old.
Dude, you're the one arguing to debate your own grandmother, and I'm the crazy one.
You're thinking about your
I'm the crazy one.
All right, well, at least he's not gaslighting him by yelling at him and then telling him to calm down repeatedly.
Calm down. Nathan, calm down.
Oh.
Okay, well, at least he's not likening him to being demonic and satanic.
Exactly. So you're admitting that it's not moral. You're admitting that you don't care about morality whatsoever. It's demonic. It's literally satanic, man. It's literally satanic.
All right, well, at least he's going to have a fair one-on-one debate and not enlist the help of another adult to come in and dogpile on him.
I'm actually sending the join link to one of my Polish friends, actually. My Polish friend wants to ask you a few questions about Poland. I'm just gonna bring him in.
Let's not be talking shit behind his back. But no, I mean, I'll leave it. I'll leave if he wants. I do think it's unfair.
I don't know. The chat's very upset.
Well, no, I get why they're upset. I just wanted to ask him a few questions because
I thought it'd be interesting because you're literally Polish, but.
Get it.
All right, let's go back to 1v1. Let's go back to 1v1.
It gets so much worse. Then his chat calls him out for trying to get a 14-year-old to say some edgy stuff to clip farm him because his dad's Destiny.
Trying to ruin a 14-year-old by farming clips. I didn't farm any clips, dude. These are things that he said, okay? These are things that he said.
Yeah, you conniving Drew. That's what clip farming is. You show what somebody said. And if he's not clip farming, then why did he post this the next day? On X, I debated Destiny's Groyper's son, and then he plays a clip from the debate. But there's one last Drewplicitous thing I have to show you.
I'm not profiting of it. I've made no money from this. Like, I got like, what, a $5 super chat. I'm not doing this for money.
He's not trying to profit off of it. He's not doing this for money. But he monetized the video. That's why ads play during the video.
I'm on Banker.
Don't let sound be the weakest part of your video. With some of the best music.
Because blame on the Jewish people here.
Even after all those dirty Drew tricks, the comments unanimously decided Nathan won the debate. Nathan has some of the best arguments I've heard on this topic that only a 14-year-old could deliver. It's already very suspicious that in 19 countries, adults would go to jail for saying what this 14-year-old is saying. So enough yapping, let's hop in the chamber.
To the forbidden history.
Destiny, you went to the Holocaust Museum with him.
Mm-hmm.
Did that have any influence on your views?
No, not really.
Why is that? I'm interested.
I didn't pay too much attention to the memorial. I looked around, of course, some of the stuff there. It was sad, but I was kind of critical of a lot of the stuff I saw there, especially one of the doors for the supposed gas chamber. Yes, it was wooden, and yes, it had handles. That kind of clicked in my mind. I thought that was kind of strange, and then as I explored more of the memorial, that kind of solidified my opinions in a way.
Masterful. Nothing short of absolutely masterful. Is that legal to say in other countries? Yeah, actually, what convinced me to change my mind about it, or what convinced me that we haven't been told the truth about it, was going to the museum, and I found, it was sad, but I found all of the evidence wholly uncompelling. Yeah, what convinced me is your best evidence that it's bad evidence. How do you approach that? What a great start. That's how the conversation should always start.
That happened. So I'm not saying all of it's fake, but I'm saying that a lot of the pictures, or the fact that they had a fake Hitler quote on the wall, that was strange to me. And then the fact that some of the pictures looked a little weird, and then also shrinks a bit.
Can you explain what is your actual position here? Is your position that the Holocaust did not happen?
Oh, yeah.
This is so confusing. So typically it's denial if you're minimizing or really challenging the established facts of this event. So if Nathan says there was a fake Hitler quote on the wall in the museum, wouldn't you address that? Wouldn't you address that fact and go, what are you talking about? What was the quote and how is it fake? But he skips right over that. Is that strange to anybody? You would think, since there's laws in countries, and since this is so established, you'd be ready to go, aha, you're saying it's fake. That's denial, that's minimizing, that's illegal. You go to jail in certain countries. But what was the quote? And then just show how the quote was real. But he skips right over it and never addresses it. That's a little weird if you're asking me.
It didn't happen. So there were no killings of Jews. There was no persecution of Jews by Nazi Germany. In your view.
I'm not saying that. The Holocaust isn't persecution, and specifically mass murder and the targeting of Jewish people in World War II. That's what the Holocaust was. I'm not saying that Jews didn't die. I'm not saying that they weren't persecuted. I know they were persecuted. In 1936, that's when it was really bad for one of the first times. When Hitler was in power, and then also there were killings of Jews. There were Nazi death squads that specifically targeted Jewish prisoners in concentration camps. I know that happened.
So I'm just trying to work this out. You're reading Mein Kampf, and in Mein Kampf, Hitler expresses over hundreds of pages his absolute hatred of the Jews. Would you agree with that?
Yes, he does.
Okay. But you don't believe that he persecuted the Jews when he came to power. I'm just trying to work this out.
I never said that. I explicitly said, yeah, Jews were persecuted when he came to power.
Okay, and do you support that?
A tale as old as time. He's an anti-communist liberal Zionist, but when it comes to this one event, he has to do a struggle session. Nathan clearly said, yes, they were persecuted. And so Drew goes, okay, so do you think they were persecuted? Right after he said, yeah, they were persecuted. His brain can't compute what's happening right now. The main contention is going to be, a lot of people have suffered, a lot of people have been through persecution, but that doesn't mean give this its own goofy little word. That's where the real nuance of the disagreement's going to come into play.
Okay, respond to that question.
Okay.
In some ways, not all aspects of the persecution, but in some ways, yeah.
So wait, sorry. Okay, let me just clarify that question again. So, when it comes to, so you agree that Hitler hated Jews, and you agree that he persecuted Jews when he came to power.
Yes.
And I'm asking, do you support the persecution in that way?
Overall, yes. Some aspects, no. But if we're just saying yes or no completely, then I'd have to be leaning more towards yes.
Why? How can you lean towards yes when it comes to the active persecution of millions of Jewish people?
Well, Drew, the Jews have been fighting and losing the propaganda war for about 2,500 years, which is a quote from Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel.
We Jews have been fighting and losing the propaganda war for about 2,500 years.
Now, I don't really have the time to cover 2,500 years of bad public relations with this particular community, but there might be something there, is all I'm saying.
This is where you're wrong, Nathan, because really, even at the height of the war on the Eastern Front, the Germans were utilizing and removing a significant amount of rail stock for the transportation of Jews to death camps. So even at the height of the war, a significant amount of the German industrial capacity, the railroad capacity, was actually diverted to the mass killings of Jews. And the use of Jewish slave labor was a massive part of the German industrial effort during World War II.
Okay, so number one, a lot more railroads to concentration camps, supply trains, stuff like that, transportations of Jewish people from camp to camp were bombed by the Allies during World War II. This is known, this is documented pretty well. And second fact, slave labor does not always mean genocide, okay? There are so many other countries that were also using slave labor that weren't trying to genocide those people. Now, I don't get why you think slave labor would equal genocide when it comes to this case, because if they're using all of these people to continue their industrial output, to continue output of products for soldiers to use in the Eastern Front, they wouldn't be also genociding these people.
You gotta respect the dedication. He's like, okay, well, if they're using them for slave labor, then they need them for labor. I mean, think of like American slavery. Like, well, they're doing the labor, so we need them for the labor. So why would we genocide them if we need them for the labor? Okay, I mean, I'm not very invested in this. I'm really not invested in this topic. I'm just listening to what's being said, taking it in, and seeing how good the argument is. Like, okay, I haven't thought of that before. All right, so he's trying to make the distinction of this idea we have of genocide, and they're just killing them as quickly as possible, but also using them as slave labor. So there's a distinction here that's important to draw upon, if I'm interpreting what he's saying in the best faith possible. But let's hear a little bit more about how the United States bombed transports which killed Jews.
It wasn't because they were sick and couldn't work, because some sick people did.
So you're admitting that basically people who could not work were basically killed.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean genocide. There were specific meetings held to get them more food and supplies, while allies were bombing these transportations. Like,
I gotta make clear, one of the biggest arguments against the Allies during World War II is that they were fully aware of places like Auschwitz, and they didn't ever actually try to bomb the crematoria. They didn't actually try to properly stop these places from functioning. So why is that?
Well, they're not going to bomb. They're not going to bomb the whole camp. No, they're bombing transports. They're bombing transports, not the camp.
So you're saying that
they sometimes did, actually. They did sometimes bomb transports. There's examples. I think around 1942, Americans started bombing these railroads, along with other bombings near where the old German Polish border was, to cut off transportation of Nazis to the Eastern Front. They also bombed railroads going to concentration camps. They killed some Jewish people as they were being transported. The reason that we're not taught this is because America knows this is them killing innocent people and then blaming it on another country. That's why we're not really taught the fact that America bombed some of these transports with Jews being transported at the same time.
I want to clarify here.
So let's enlist the help of Elon Musk's Nazi AI, Grok, to answer this question. During World War II, did the United States bomb railways and kill Jewish people? The United States did not intentionally target Jewish people during World War II. How sociopathic of an answer is that already? Kind of a yes or no question, not a yes and then an explanation. It's a really sociopathic answer. Did you rob that guy? Now, I didn't intend to rob that guy. It's a yes or no. You really want the yes up front. The US, as a part of the Allied forces, conducted extensive bombing campaigns against Nazi Germany and its infrastructure, including railways to disrupt the German war machine. However, these bombings were not aimed at killing Jewish people, or other civilians specifically. The focus was on crippling Nazi logistics and military operations. That said, Allied bombings, including those by the US, sometimes caused unintended civilian casualties due to the inaccuracy of bombing technology at the time or the proximity of civilian areas to military targets. This could have included Jewish people living in occupied territories or near bombed infrastructure, but they reaffirm there was no deliberate policy to target the Jews. Grok, that wasn't the question. So let me clarify the question for you. Let's try this again. Grok, during World War II, did the United States bomb railways and kill Jewish people even if it wasn't intentional? Yes, thank God. The United States, as part of the Allied bombing campaigns during World War II, did target railways and other infrastructure in Nazi-occupied Europe to disrupt German military logistics. These railways were critical for transporting troops, supplies, and tragically, Jewish people and other prisoners to concentration camps and extermination camps. While the US did not intentionally target Jewish people, the bombing sometimes resulted in unintended civilian casualties including Jewish individuals, due to the proximity of civilian areas or deportation trains to strategic targets and the limited precision of bombing technology at the time. Wow, the things you have to do to get a yes. Like, I get it, it wasn't on purpose. We don't do this with anything else, but with this specific topic, you ask it a question and it's like, what? It wasn't, they didn't try to. So is that a yes? It's possible. Did it definitely happen? Yeah, it did. Okay, you gotta ask it a couple of times. You gotta smack some sense into this bitch to get a fucking answer around here. Anyways, let's pivot to a lighter topic, slave labor. And let's hear about how this particular event wasn't as bad as other events. This is made to be something unique. In certain ways it was, but there was plenty of other atrocities that have happened.
The reason why, the reason why I overall support them is it's not about the slave labor and stuff like that. And hold on, let me real quick. You're taking Germany as an example and then making it seem like it's one of the worst examples in history. Almost every other country was also using slave labor. To say that Germany is evil for using slave labor, and
in the 1930s and 1940s, in the 1940s, mate, slavery was abolished 100 years plus before. The British
they were using slave labor in Africa. They did enslave Africans and force them to make things.
The British banned slavery at the start of the 19th century. America obviously banned slavery after the Civil War. Back in the so you're there.
Be on my PC because it's just better on my PC.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so here's my response to that. Yes, British did use forced labor. It wasn't as bad as the Atlantic slave trade. But yes, there are examples during World War II of France and Britain using forced slave labor. Near Central Africa, the British used forced slave labor. Then also in East Africa, British forced tens of thousands of Africans into into projects like colonial labor camps and stuff. And then in Kenya, there's also an example of this. A squatter system was used to promote British slavery in Africa. They used slave labor just as much as the Nazis did, if not more. The Nazis weren't using slave labor.
This is just straight up. This is a straight up lie. The British banned slavery at the start of the 19th century.
So let's kick it back to Elon Musk's vociferously Nazi AI. Grok, did the British have slave labor in Kenya during World War II? During World War II, the British colonial administration in Kenya did not employ slave labor. Well, looks like Destiny's 14-year-old son is incorrect. And we can hold on. Did not employ slave labor in the sense of chattel slavery. Here comes the post-World War II consensus, where we have to have approved facts and the inconvenient facts must be omitted and redefined. So it wasn't chattel slavery. Well, that's like the worst slavery. That wasn't what I asked. Again, Grok, open up your ears, please. Which had been abolished in the British Empire in 1833. So the sneaky Drew is correct in the approved history sense, where technically we wouldn't define it as slavery. Oh, let's read on and see if it resembled slavery. However, they relied heavily on coerced and exploitative labor systems that, while not legally slavery, involved significant compulsion and harsh conditions, particularly for African Kenyans. Here's a concise overview based on the historical context. Why there was the compulsory labor ordinance. Imagine if we had that in the United States, would we call it slavery? Introduced pre-World War II but intensified during the war, which required African men to work on public projects such as roads, railways, and military installations. For example, thousands of Kenyans were conscripted to build airfields, roads, and other infrastructure to support the Allied war effort in East Africa, often with minimal or no pay under grueling conditions. Why, what about the Native Authority Ordinance, which allowed colonial officials to enforce labor quotas, and chiefs were pressured to supply workers for European-owned plantations or settler farms? Africans who resisted faced fines, imprisonment, or physical punishment. This system, while not slavery, was highly exploitative and limited personal autonomy. Military and labor conscription. The British recruited over 75,000 Kenyans into the King's African Rifles and other units, often through coercive methods. Many were assigned to labor battalions rather than combat roles, performing tasks like carrying supplies, building fortifications, or working as porters in campaigns. Conditions were harsh, with inadequate food, medical care, and high mortality rates in some cases. Recruitment was often forced by colonial chiefs under British orders, leaving little room for voluntary choice. Conditions and exploitation. While these laborers were technically not slaves, the colonial labor system was underpinned by racial hierarchies and economic exploitation. Wages, when paid, were extremely low, and workers faced brutal working conditions, long hours, and sometimes corporal punishment. The Kinpade system, a passbook required for African workers, further restricted their mobility and tied them to their employers, resembling aspects of bonded slavery? No, of bonded labor. It's not bonded slavery, it's bonded labor. Comparison to slavery. The labor practices in Kenya during World War II were not chattel slavery. Well, that wasn't the question, as the workers were not legally owned. However, the coercive nature, backed by colonial laws, economic pressure, and sometimes violence, meant that African laborers had little freedom to refuse. Historians often describe these practices as forced labor or colonial exploitation rather than slavery, but they were oppressive nonetheless. See? It wasn't slavery. It was just different words for a similar kind of slavery. Well, this dirty, rotten son of a destiny. This kid's right. This kid's onto something. And obviously you can't defend everything he says, but he makes points that are never made, that are true. And the issue is that, much like with BLM, much like with racism, much like with anti-Semitism, we are only allowed to culturally discuss these issues through a single oppressive lens that leaves out all other context. So let's end it here. A Destiny's Son 14 is not your run-of-the-mill 14. People are having him on shows to use his father's name for clicks. He's essentially the only 14-year-old to ever exist with a father who has been streaming the entire time he's been alive. He's definitely the only son to ever exist to have to endure being the son of Destiny on top of it. A portion of this may be rebelling against his father, but also, Homeboy has his daddy's toolbox to debate in favor of the controversial position of culturally accepted topics. Unfortunately, the satanic Druze of the world will engage him in debate to have a reaction like this.
Wow. That was actually, that was like legitimately pretty scary. He straight up said that his own grandmother should be deported.
When the 14-year-old says stuff like this.
Hold on. Hold your horses, Bucko. Hold your horses.
Have a good one.